The air inside the boutique was thick with silence, not the kind that comforts you, but the kind that waits for permission to judge. Elise Monroe had only stepped 5 feet into the store before she was scanned like merchandise. A white saleswoman lifted her chin, eyes sharp. Another whispered to a colleague without breaking her smile. They didn't ask her name, they didn't ask what she needed. They asked her to leave. Not loudly, not with yelling, but with the kind of voice that assumes you don't belong. Elise wasn't wearing logos, no entourage, no gold, just elegance, understated, but they saw only what they wanted to see. So when a security guard approached her, hands folded, tone polite but firm, it wasn't a surprise. What was a surprise? Elise didn't say a word. She simply turned around and walked out. What the store didn't know, they had just thrown out the one woman who could decide whether their company survived the year. And Elise, she was about to send a message they'd never forget. If you're new here, welcome to Echoes of Hope Stories HQ, where true human stories reveal the courage behind injustice. Like, share, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. And tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. We see you, and your voice matters. She could have stayed quiet. She could have played it safe. But instead, Elise made a single move that wiped out a $5.1 billion empire in under 48 hours. And it all started with one insult in Soho. Her name is Elise Monroe, 42 years old, CEO of Monroe Lux Group. And depending on who you ask in the business world, she's either the woman transforming global luxury or the one they never saw coming. Elise was born on the east side of Detroit. Her mother, Denise, worked the night shift as a nurse. Her father, Leonard, fixed engines during the day and read history books at night. They didn't have much, but they had rules. Speak with purpose, never apologize for being smart, and never let the world tell you what you're worth. By high school, Elise was tutoring her classmates in math. By 20, she was graduating at the top of her economics class from Howard. Harvard came next, then a fast rise through consulting until she launched Monroe Lux Group from a 2-bedroom apartment with just one investor who believed in her: herself. Today, Monroe Lux owns commercial properties on 3 continents, invests in clean tech, and more recently began acquiring luxury fashion brands that had fallen out of step with the modern world. Elise wasn't just interested in profits. She was interested in storytelling, who gets to be seen, celebrated, and sold as worthy. She has 2 children, Ava, 16, who speaks through her violin, and Jordan, 11, who's already coding apps faster than most adults can open them. Elise raises them with the same rules she was raised with: respect, excellence, and no shrinking. Those who've worked with her describe her as composed, strategic, the kind of person who doesn't raise her voice because she doesn't need to. Her presence speaks for her. But there's another side to Elise, one that doesn't get written about in financial magazines. Every quarter, she hosts a private dinner for young Black women entering the business world. No press, no speeches, just food, truth, and mentorship. Her foundation has sent dozens of girls to college, some of whom now work at Monroe Lux. She didn't just climb the ladder, one mentee once said. She's been rebuilding it. Elise's power isn't in her position, it's in how she carries it. Quietly, relentlessly, authentically. So when she walked into Maison Revelle's Soho boutique that afternoon, she didn't announce herself. She wasn't wearing anything loud. There were no bodyguards or flashing lights, just a woman in a cream wool coat checking the pulse of a company she was days away from owning. What she didn't expect was to be reminded, yet again, that for some people, the color of your skin still speaks louder than the content of your resume. What the staff saw was a Black woman standing alone. What they missed was a billionaire about to decide their future. And that was a mistake that would cost them everything. Elise Monroe had walked into hundreds of boutiques over the course of her career. Some she owned, some she was still negotiating to buy. But that afternoon in Soho, she didn't walk in as a CEO, not visibly. No assistant, no briefcase, no PR entourage, just Elise, alone and deliberate. The store was pristine. Sleek marble floors, mannequins positioned like sculptures, racks filled with structured coats and minimalist handbags. No music, just the faint buzz of hush-money elegance, a place that made you whisper without being told. Elise moved slowly, absorbing the environment. Every detail mattered. This wasn't a casual pop-in. She was days away from finalizing the acquisition of Maison Revel, a once iconic European fashion house struggling to keep up with the times. Her firm was set to invest $5.1 billion to revive the brand, and this boutique was one of the test points. Elise wanted to see the culture up close, raw and unfiltered. She was barely 2 steps in before eyes landed on her. Behind the counter, 3 sales associates stood. 2 white women in their 30s and a younger black woman with nervous energy. The older of the 2, Meredith, narrowed her gaze. Her lips pressed together, posture straightening like she was suddenly on alert. She turned to her colleague and muttered just loud enough to be heard, "Is she lost?" The comment wasn't followed by laughter. Just silence and tension. Elise approached a display of limited edition blazers, running her fingers along the edge of a navy silk piece. Her face remained unreadable, but inside she clocked everything. The body language, the whisper, the unspoken alarm that rang the moment she walked in. Meredith stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said, tight-lipped. "That rack is reserved for invited clients only." Elise met her eyes. "I wasn't aware there were restrictions," she said calmly. "They're not posted," Meredith replied, "but we try to keep this section exclusive." There was no offer to help. No curiosity. No, "Can I show you anything?" Just the unmistakable tone of dismissal. One that Elise had heard in boardrooms and airports, but never without consequence. She stepped back from the rack. "Of course," Elise said, voice smooth as stone. Meredith lingered for a moment, then turned and walked off. Elise glanced across the store. The younger black employee, Naya, looked away quickly, as if she'd been silently rooting for something better to happen. A man in a tailored suit passed her, received a greeting, and was offered sparkling water within seconds. Elise, still empty-handed, walked toward a small table near the back, displaying handbags. As she reached out to examine one, a new presence emerged. The security guard, tall, pale, unsure of himself but backed by policy. "Ma'am," he said, "we're going to have to ask you to leave. Store policy doesn't allow loitering in restricted areas." Elise blinked once. "Loitering?" "Yes," he said. "You've been here several minutes and haven't made a purchase or requested assistance." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't explain who she was. She didn't offer a card or drop a name. Elise just looked at him, long enough for him to shift his weight, and then turned to the door. No drama, no raised voices, no protests. But every step she took toward the exit echoed with a silent promise. Customers glanced but didn't intervene. Not one asked if she needed help. Not one questioned what just happened. Outside, the street was still buzzing. Yellow cabs honked. Influencers posed for photos nearby, and Elise stood still for a moment, looking back at the storefront like she was etching it into her memory. They didn't recognize her. Not the woman. Not the history she carried. Not the authority she represented. But Elise Monroe? She recognized everything. She'd seen the same script before. The assumption, the brush-off, the slow build to exclusion. The difference this time? She held the pen that would rewrite the ending. Because just beyond the storefront glass was a $5.1 billion decision still waiting for her signature. And suddenly, it wasn't just business anymore. It was personal. What came next didn't involve lawyers or press conferences. It involved removal, but not the kind they expected. Elise Monroe didn't tweet. She didn't post a video. She didn't even call her publicist. But by nightfall, she had already begun dismantling the future of Maison Revel. The next morning, Elise convened her core executive team. The meeting wasn't scheduled, no agenda. Just a quiet, early call in her Manhattan office with her legal counsel, COO, and head of acquisitions. The mood? Focused, controlled, deadly. There were no theatrics. Elise simply sat at the head of the table and said, "The deal's off." The room went still. The $5.1 billion Maison Revel acquisition had taken 2 years of strategy, audits, brand positioning, and investor negotiations. Everything was ready to close. But Elise had made her decision. No long explanation, no revenge speech, just a redirect of capital and a note to prepare a formal withdrawal. By noon, Monroe Lux's legal team had contacted Maison Revel's parent company. The acquisition was terminated, effective immediately. No negotiations, no reconsideration. The PR team, trained for crisis, stood by for Elise's public statement. But she wasn't interested in spectacle. Not yet. She wanted silence first. The kind that makes the other side sweat, and sweat they did. Inside Maison Revel, panic hit like a lightning strike. Initial calls from Monroe Lux went unanswered. When the boutique's regional manager found out what happened, staff at the Soho location were immediately pulled into a closed-door review. Meredith, the lead associate, was suspended by the end of the day. The security guard was quietly reassigned. HR scrambled to draft internal memos that sounded concerned without admitting liability. But the damage couldn't be hidden. Someone, maybe a witness, maybe Nia, the young black employee who had watched it all happen, leaked what happened to a Fashion Insider blog. Within hours, the headline was everywhere. Black CEO thrown out of store she was about to buy. And just like that, the internet erupted. Fashion Twitter was the first to bite. Then came the business press, the culture sites, and the mainstream news outlets. By midnight, #Revel racism was trending in 5 countries. Industry veterans weighed in. Celebrities reposted the story. Public outrage built with every hour. Some customers vowed to boycott the brand. Others shared their own quiet experiences of being followed, dismissed, or outright ignored in luxury spaces. Maison Revel went dark. No posts, no response. When the CEO finally issued a statement 2 days later, it was late, hollow, and riddled with deflection. Maison Revel stands for inclusion. We regret the experience of any shopper who feels they were not welcomed. We are reviewing the matter internally. The comment section was a war zone. One user replied, "You didn't just lose a sale, you lost $5 billion in 5 minutes." Elise, for her part, waited. She knew the story didn't need her voice to catch fire. It already had. But when she finally spoke, it wasn't at a podium or in an interview. It was a single statement, released through her foundation's site. "I've built enough to walk away, but not enough to stay silent." No hashtags, no dramatics, just truth. Those 14 words were screenshotted, reposted, quoted in Forbes, Business Insider, and Essence within the hour. Because this wasn't just a corporate misstep. It was a public revelation. That racism doesn't care how many zeros are in your bank account. That even a woman who signs billion-dollar checks can be made to feel like a trespasser in a space she was poised to own. And Elise? She was just getting started. What most people didn't know? Elise Monroe was less than 2 weeks away from closing a $5.1 billion acquisition. The Maison Revel deal wasn't just another purchase. It was poised to reshape the luxury fashion landscape. The plan was ambitious. Expand the aging brand into untapped African markets, reposition its global identity through storytelling, and overhaul its leadership to reflect the world it claimed to dress. Elise didn't want to slap a new logo on outdated values. She wanted to reimagine what luxury could be. Inclusive, intelligent, rooted in truth. And Elise wasn't just overseeing the deal. She was the architect. She'd flown across continents, studied consumer shifts, brought in culture consultants, even held private roundtables with rising black designers. Her team had created a diversity pledge meant to rebuild Revel from the inside out, not performatively, but permanently. That dream ended the moment she was treated like a thief instead of a client. When Monroe Luxe announced the termination of the acquisition, the fashion world didn't react with confusion, it reacted with chaos. Within 72 hours, Maison Revel's stock plummeted 17%. Investors scrambled for answers. Boardroom calls turned frantic. Some tried to reach out to Elise directly. One even offered to fly to New York for a face-to-face apology. Elise declined. There would be no meetings, no talks, no saving what had already failed. Internally, Maison Revel imploded. Shareholders blamed the public relations team for not responding faster. Executives pointed fingers at middle managers for failing to recognize Elise in store. HR sent out a rushed sensitivity training memo. But the truth? The rot ran deeper than any single person. Elise hadn't walked away out of anger. She walked away because she knew that no amount of money could patch a culture built on exclusion. And she had somewhere better to place her bet. While Maison Revel tried to stop its bleeding, Elise redirected $500 million of her acquisition capital to a rising but underfunded brand based in Atlanta, House of Niani. Founded by Amara Kinte, a Parsons-trained designer who had struggled for years to break into high fashion, House of Niani had the designs, the vision, and the talent, but lacked the infrastructure. They were making magic with limited distribution, bare-bones marketing, and too few believers. Until Elise arrived. She didn't just write a check, she showed up. She brought elite marketers from Paris, branding strategists from Milan, and a former creative director from one of Europe's top fashion houses, all on board to scale House of Niani into a global player. The mission was simple. We don't need to beg for space. We'll build our own fashion future. Within 6 months, House of Niani made its debut at Paris Fashion Week. They didn't rent a back room or share a stage. They opened the show, and the fashion world noticed. Ava DuVernay wore their gown to Cannes. Viola Davis called their pieces armor for the soul. Beyoncé posted them without a tag, just the word, royal. The industry that had overlooked Amara for a decade suddenly scrambled to schedule interviews and cover shoots. But House of Niani didn't lean into celebrity, they leaned into community. Their fabrics were sourced from West African cooperatives. Their campaigns featured everyday Black women, entrepreneurs, and artists. They launched a grant program for underrepresented fashion students. And through it all, Elise stayed in the background. She wasn't interested in glory, she was interested in legacy. The press called her decision bold. Business analysts called it reckless at first, then revolutionary. But for Elise, it was neither. It was logical. She had seen what happens when systems decide who gets to belong. So she built something where everyone started on equal ground. What Maison Revel lost wasn't just a deal. They lost relevance. They became a cautionary tale, the brand that chose arrogance over awareness. Meanwhile, House of Niani became more than a label. It became a symbol of resistance, of resilience, of what happens when Black excellence is met not with doubt, but with funding. Elise Munro didn't just walk away from $5.1 billion, she reallocated that value to a future that reflected her truth. And for many watching, that wasn't just a business move. It was a seismic shift in who gets to control the narrative and who gets to own the room. If you're still watching at this point, it means you understand this wasn't just about fashion. This was about value, visibility, dignity, and who gets to decide who belongs. So if you're with us, like this video, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Type, "I see it too," in the comments if you've ever watched someone get shut out of a space they should have owned. But here's what should make us all stop. What if Elise Munro wasn't a CEO? What if she didn't walk out of that store with the power to pull $5.1 billion off the table? What if she had been a student, a nurse, a mother on her lunch break? Because Elise's story didn't happen in isolation. It's not a shocking twist, it's a snapshot, one frame in a global pattern. Let's talk about the data. Studies show that Black shoppers are twice as likely to be followed in retail stores as their white counterparts, regardless of how they're dressed, what they carry, or how they behave. A 2021 report from a leading consumer research group found that 44% of Black customers in the US have experienced discrimination in a retail setting. The number jumps even higher in luxury environments. And it's not just about surveillance. It's tone, it's treatment, it's access. Unconscious bias plays a major role, but unconscious doesn't mean harmless, it means unchallenged. And in spaces like high-end fashion, it often wears a polished smile. A Black woman walks into a boutique. She gets the silent stares, the tight-lipped greetings, the assumption that she doesn't belong unless proven otherwise. And it's not just America. In London, a marketing executive named Shauna was stopped mid-purchase and asked if she had stolen someone's card. In Paris, a Nigerian diplomat was followed around a jewelry store while her white assistant was offered espresso. A New York pediatrician once shared, "I was told, straight to my face, that a coat was probably out of my range. I was wearing scrubs. I had just come from saving a child's life." These aren't random insults, they're patterns. Patterns that cut across income, education, and titles. Because in many spaces, Black identity is still seen as suspect before it is seen as professional. Elise Munro's grace didn't protect her. Her Harvard degree didn't insulate her. Her billions didn't buy her the benefit of the doubt. That's the reality so many live with, walking into rooms where their qualifications are invisible, but their skin is not. And here's the deeper question. What if that security guard hadn't just asked Elise to leave? What if he'd escalated? What if someone had called the police? History has already given us the answers. From Yale dorm rooms to Starbucks lobbies to neighborhood sidewalks, we've seen how quickly assumptions can turn dangerous. Deadly, even. So when we talk about Elise's story, we're not just talking about corporate loss, we're talking about who gets to move freely in public spaces without suspicion. We're talking about how racism isn't just about hate, it's about access. Access to dignity, access to trust, access to safety. Elise's story made headlines because of the money involved. But millions of stories like hers happen quietly, without cameras or consequences. The woman who gets ignored in the dressing room. The man who gets followed through electronics. The kid who gets questioned while browsing shoes. Elise had the tools to answer back with power. But most people don't. And that's why this story matters. Because it reminds us that success doesn't always shield you. And that real change doesn't come from apologies. It comes from accountability. So the next time someone says, maybe it was just a misunderstanding, ask them, why do so many people look just like Elise when these misunderstandings happen? This wasn't just about one woman in one store. It was about how easily racism hides in plain sight and how long it's been allowed to stay there. Elise Monroe didn't retreat. She built louder. While Maison Revel scrambled to repair its image, Elise was already shaping something bigger, something permanent. She knew that public outrage fades fast, but infrastructure? That lasts. So instead of spending her energy on press battles or performative panels, she laid the foundation for change. Within weeks, she launched the Monroe Foundation for Retail Equity, a nonprofit committed to addressing racial bias in the global fashion and retail industries. It wasn't symbolic, it was strategic. The foundation's mission was threefold: support emerging Black designers with funding, mentorship, and international exposure. Partner with fashion schools to expand scholarships and create pipelines for underrepresented talent. Develop and distribute anti-bias toolkits for luxury retailers. Practical, evidence-based training that went beyond performative seminars. Elise wasn't trying to raise awareness. She was demanding accountability. She wasn't just calling out a problem. She was building a solution with her own money, her own network, and her own fire. Fashion schools across New York and Atlanta were among the first to join her initiative. Soon, design institutions in Paris and Cape Town followed. The foundation also created a grant program that awarded $50,000 startup funds to 5 Black-owned fashion brands every quarter. But Elise didn't stop at the education pipeline. She brought change to the boardroom. Within 6 months, her anti-bias toolkit had been adopted by over 70 high-end retailers across North America and Europe. Participation wasn't optional. Brands that refused lost access to Monroe Luxe's real estate properties and logistics networks. One of the quiet ways Elise had always held power in the luxury world. She gave the industry a choice: grow or get left behind. The press took notice. She appeared on CNN, sat down with Vogue, and was invited to speak at Harvard Business School. But Elise never led with anger. She led with clarity. In one widely shared interview, when asked if she regretted pulling out of the Maison Revel deal, Elise responded, "Power is knowing when to speak and knowing when to walk away." That line became a rallying cry. It appeared on tote bags, protest signs, and magazine covers. But for Elise, it wasn't a brand. It was survival. The foundation quickly became a hub, not just for fashion students or retail workers, but for anyone who had ever been pushed to the margins of spaces they helped build. And Elise remained present. She didn't lock herself in offices or hide behind foundation directors. She showed up. In Atlanta, she held fireside chats with high school students interested in design. In LA, she toured a retail training center she helped fund. In Brooklyn, she walked the halls of a community center named after her father. Montage scenes show her impact. Teen girls gathered in a mentorship circle, laughing nervously as Elise asked them who they wanted to design for. Ava, standing on stage at a benefit gala, performing a haunting violin solo that brought the room to silence. Jordan, smiling proudly as he demonstrated the new app he'd coded, an anonymous feedback tool for customers to report discriminatory service across retail brands. These weren't PR moments, they were personal. Because for Elise, change didn't mean just breaking the system. It meant replacing it with something better. More honest, more human. She didn't try to fix the system that failed her. She made it irrelevant. Retail insiders began referring to Elise as the quiet architect of reform. But to those who knew her story, that title felt too soft. She wasn't quiet. She was precise, and she never raised her voice because she never had to. Her voice came through in policy, in grants, in the young Black girl who walked into a boutique for the first time and was actually welcomed. This wasn't just redemption, it was realignment. And Elise Monroe wasn't looking for applause. She was looking for permanence. By the end of the year, the Monroe Foundation had helped fund over 20 Black-owned fashion brands, trained thousands of retail employees across the globe, and partnered with 5 major universities to create long-term equity programs in design education. Elise didn't just make noise, she made room for the next generation, for the ones still fighting to be seen, and for the ones who will never forget what it feels like to walk into a room, be misjudged, and walk right back out with your head held high. The messages poured in, thousands of them. Emails, DMs, comments from strangers across the world, some long, some just a single sentence. But all of them echoed the same truth. They saw themselves in Elise Monroe. One woman from Toronto wrote, "I watched this and cried. I've lived it. Too many times. The difference is, I had to keep quiet to keep my job." A teacher from Johannesburg messaged, "Thank you for not staying silent. It gave me the courage to speak up at my own school." A 19-year-old design student in Atlanta said, "I was going to quit. I didn't think people like me had a place in fashion." Then I heard about Elise. For every comment that praised Elise's power move, there were 10 more that spoke of quiet pain. Moments where someone was overlooked, dismissed, followed, or told with a smile that, "This just isn't for you." These weren't just reactions, they were confessions. Proof that the problem wasn't rare, just rarely acknowledged. And that's the weight stories like this carry. They don't just highlight injustice, they validate experience. They remind people they're not imagining it, that it's not in their head. That the subtle things, the looks, the language, the tone, add up. A Black mother from London shared that her 14-year-old daughter no longer wants to go into certain stores because she's tired of being watched. A Navy veteran recalled being asked twice to prove his credit card was his while standing in uniform. A business owner in Chicago said he gets followed every time he visits a supplier showroom, even though he orders in bulk. These weren't extreme cases, they were normal. And that's exactly what makes them dangerous. What would you do if you saw this happen, CEO, but to a teenager, a retiree, a neighbor? Would you speak up? Would you look away? Elise's story is powerful because of what she represents. Not just Black success, but Black stillness in the face of insult, Black strategy in response to exclusion, and Black leadership that doesn't just react, but builds something better. She didn't make headlines because she yelled, she made them because she moved. She moved her money, she moved her voice, she moved the center of power away from those who thought it belonged only to them. But maybe the most powerful shift? She gave others permission to stand tall in spaces that try to make them feel small, to walk out of rooms where they are not respected, to speak without fear and act without apology. Are you listening when it happens quietly, when it's not recorded, when there's no press? Because the truth is, most of these stories don't go viral. They go unseen, unheard, unanswered. And that's why we tell them here. Because every time a story like Elise's is told, someone else decides they don't have to carry their silence anymore. A student decides to stay in their program. A shopper files a complaint instead of swallowing the shame. A manager looks again at their hiring board and realizes it's all one shade. This story started with one moment of humiliation, but it became a movement of recognition. And long after the headlines fade, the real work continues, not in courtrooms or stock reports, but in how we treat one another in the everyday. In the choices we make when no one is watching, and in the voices we amplify when they speak truth. Because the real echo of Elise Monroe's story isn't just what she lost, it's what we all gained. They saw a woman alone in a boutique. They saw her skin. They saw her silence, but they didn't see her power. Because Elise Monroe never had to raise her voice. She didn't shout, she didn't plead, she didn't explain herself. She simply walked away and took $5.1 billion with her. And in doing so, she raised the bar. She reminded the world that power doesn't always look like noise. Sometimes it looks like strategy. Sometimes it looks like grace under insult. Sometimes it looks like refusing to let ignorance have the final word. She didn't demand entry. She didn't ask for validation. She didn't fight for a seat at their table. She built her own. And in that decision, she created space for others who've been made to feel like outsiders in places they helped build, places they could easily own. She built more than a foundation. She built freedom. for young Black designers who had nowhere to launch, for shoppers who were tired of being watched, not welcomed, for professionals who've had to bite their tongues just to keep a paycheck. Elise didn't just show us how to walk away. She showed us how to rebuild on our own terms. Let this story remind you, your silence is not weakness. Your exit can be an act of strength. And your presence, when backed by truth and vision, can shake foundations. When they closed the door, she didn't knock, she built another door. That's not just a quote, it's a blueprint, and it belongs to anyone who's ever been told they didn't belong, only to find out they were the ones holding the key all along. If this story moved you, don't leave quietly. Subscribe to Echoes of Hope Stories HQ for true stories that echo with justice, courage, and change. And if you believe stories like Elise's deserve to be seen and heard, like this video and hit that subscribe button right now. Because this isn't just a story about one woman. It's a reflection of what's broken and what still can be fixed. Have you ever been overlooked, underestimated, or silenced at work? Share your story in the comments. Whether it was a moment or a pattern, you never know who your words might inspire. And tell us, what country are you watching from? We want to see how far these stories reach, because the truth doesn't stop at borders, and neither should justice. And finally, share this video with a friend, a coworker, a stranger, because you never know who might need to hear this today. And for every Elise we celebrate, there are thousands more waiting to be seen. You're not just watching a story, you're helping it reach the people who need it most.